G'day, my name is John Hollenberg. I'm the owner and founder here at 5x5 digital marketing agency based here on the Gold Coast. And we are talking sales, something that I'm really passionate about, have been doing sales for many years in my organization. And we talk about selling, Chandell. I love this. This is selling is the transfer of trust. And as I said, I was doing sales in the business for many, many years, but I'd really struggled to be the person that was charged with the responsibility of bringing the work in the door, and then making sure that we were delivering and the customers were happy and all that sort of stuff. So essentially, I reached a ceiling in terms of where I was able to get to from a business perspective. So by scaling the sales team, it made life a whole bunch easier to grow the business. And
Yes.
you've been privy to that journey as well. We've done a lot of work together over the years. The amazing Chandell Labbozzetta has twisted her arm, and she agreed to come and join us and talk sales. Chandell heads up an organization called Life Puzzle. I'm going to do a quick intro on Chandell first, but for the new people on the call, a little bit of background on me. My name's John Hollenberg, founder of 5x5, 17 years of doing this. We're based at the Gold Coast, roughly a team of 50 or so now. Won a bunch of awards, very much performance-driven approach. And the claim to fame for us is we can double a client's leads and inquiries in under 6 months and deliver a digital presence that they are super stoked with. So, Chandell, welcome.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Well, thank you so much, and welcome to everybody on the call. So I'm Chandell, and my purpose is actually to inspire confidence in others so they can make empowered decisions. I'm a master trainer of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, which is, if you haven't heard of it before, it's an art and science on how we use the language of our mind to affect our results, and also our interpersonal relationships with people. But what my real passion is helping business owners and founders scale their sales by bridging the gap between the psychology of selling, which I think is 80% of the sales conversation, and the strategy of selling, which is the 20%. And the little example that I like to use sometimes is, we often find that businesses will do one or the other really well. And the example that I like to use is that, I could give you the best cold calling script in the world, but if you don't have confidence in the salesperson to actually read from the script, then it's not worth the paper that it's written on. So it really is about bridging the gap between those two things and getting efficiency in the sales process, getting efficiency in conversion, getting that business across the line. And most importantly, we believe at Life Puzzle that sales is the #1 life skill. There are 3 important sales that we make. The first one is the one you make to yourself about your worth, your value proposition, and your confidence to create what you really want to create. The second is the sale of influence, which often doesn't involve any exchange of money. It's selling your ideas and selling your enthusiasm, getting people enrolled. And for anyone who's on the call who has children, you probably know that there's a sales conversation that happens every time you tell your kids to go to bed.
Totally. Brush their teeth is the challenge for me.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And then, of course, the third sale, which is what we're here to talk about today, and that's being convincing in building the value proposition in a product or service in exchange for premium pricing, which is what you deserve. So I'm really pleased to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing runway. Thank you. So why should someone devote the next 20 minutes to listening to you and I, Chandell? So we're really what we're talking about. We got 6 milestones on the selling. You've given a nice little runway there. 7, 11, 4. And what does that mean? And generally just knowing your numbers. So that's what we're talking about. Hang around to the end because Chandell has amazing bit of training that if you like the cut of her jib, then there's an opportunity to get more of that. So if we let's get stuck into it, Chandell. We're talking about maximizing the relationship with the top 40% Talk to us about this.
Yeah, so guys, what you can see on the screen here is something that we talk about a lot with our clients. And at any given moment, the demand generation, if we look at people who are ready to purchase, when you speak to them, or out of all the people that you're speaking to, we're really looking at the fact that only 3% of the people that you're talking to are actually ready to purchase right now. There's about 7% of people who are open to buying, but they're not really looking yet. There's 30% of people who are not really thinking about it. They're kind of indifferent. And then we've got people at the bottom who think they aren't interested and people who know that they aren't interested. And so the question around how are we maximizing the top 40% is that it's ultimately about the relationships, your value proposition, how you're talking to people and building that enthusiasm around, meeting those needs that they have or those pains that they have with the gains that are possible and the offering that you have. And that doesn't happen just by, kind of wishing and hoping. And there is actually, a set of steps that are involved in your sales process. And a lot of businesses that haven't scaled their sales don't have this figured out yet. And so the question I'd like to pose to you for a little bit of critical thinking is, what are you doing actively to maximize that top 40% of your buying audience?
Not thinking about it, indifferent. You still put them in the top 40% category. Could you talk about a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And probably the best way that I can demonstrate this is to say that many of you know I'm a published author. Well, certainly John does. A published author, Confident Closing Sales Secrets That Grow a Business by 400% in just 6 months and how they can work for you. And originally when I got the book, when I published the book, I wanted to call it Feeding Salt to Horses, right? Because we've all heard the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. If you feed it salt, then by the time you present it with the water, it'll be thirsty. It's a no-brainer. It will drink because it wants to, not because we forced it to. And so sometimes people are not thinking about something, but through your ability to be able to question, discuss, and share, the information that is the salt that makes them thirsty, they actually can become a buyer because you've enlightened them, you've educated them, you've shared knowledge where they didn't know what they didn't know, and now they do.
Sure. And that's probably leading to this about having a system to sell beyond words. And like my own personal experience, and I probably didn't set the runway well enough at the start. Like we're in the lead generation business in terms of, building digital products that ultimately get people to raise their hand and get in touch. But where we see the leaky bucket is when it goes to the offline world and the business owner or the team are charged with the responsibility to then follow up the sales, and they don't have these systems to then go and sell.
Yeah, John, I think that what you just said in terms of I know that 5x5 and the team do an amazing job of making sure that, the businesses that you work with are generating leads and quality leads. And one of the key things that we see is that sometimes it's not just about lead generation. It's what do we do once we have the lead? And for a lot of people, they rely on their intuitive selling skills. And I think, you've also talked in the past about how you never really broke down the system of what you were doing. And so it was all kind of locked in your head. And there was no real system to it. There was no consistency to it. And so it's actually about being able to understand that in order to scale your sales, if you're a founder or a business owner, or even if you're a sales professional that's leading a team, we must break these things down into the simple steps that actually, support the sales process, support that value add to the client, and then do them repetitively with that focus to be able to get that buy-in from people at each step of the journey. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second.
You talk about 6 milestones on the treasure map.
Yeah.
Do you want to give us a summary of these?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think, for those of you that haven't met me before, you might learn that I sometimes can be a little bit corny at my own expense. And so to me, I think that scaling the sales is kind of like a map, and most people don't have a map, let alone directions. And so we say that there are 6 key milestones on the treasure map to scaling your sales, and it involves different stages of the sales cycle. And so, there's your attraction piece, and what are you doing to make sure that you've got the right messaging and that you're attracting the kind of clients that you really want to work with. And then there's the process of actually converting them. Like, how do we qualify our leads? How do we make sure that they are the kind of A and B type clients that we really want to be working with? And often there's a disconnect, and this is very, very common in a service-based business where we're delivering services as well as products, where the transfer from the sales team to the delivery team can sometimes be clunky. And so what our presence online was, what our sales process was, now doesn't match the offering or the promise of our delivery. And so we must consider the way that handover takes place, because that's also a sale. How do we collect funds? Some people are great at delivering awesome projects or awesome services, and then they don't get paid for months and years, so how do we
never send the invoice or forget to send the invoice?
Some of them don't. Yes, that's right.
Or don't chase up the invoice.
Exactly. It's like the old sales thing. If you don't ask the question, then the answer is always no. And if you don't send your invoice, then you're never going to get paid, right? So, and then of course it's, how do we resource the team in terms of the touch points beyond the sale? What is our method for collecting referrals or getting 5-star reviews or whatever that might be? And then how do we lead that team of sales professionals? How do we lead our audience and our raving fans? And so those are the 16 milestones on the treasure map.
That's basically business 101. So I guess we're sort of going back up to what we call the top of the funnel, and we sort of covered the whole sort of business journey there. You want to talk about that, Chandell? 7-11-4. This is something that we invest a lot of time and effort in. So why don't you talk about that?
And look, for those of you that haven't seen it before, I highly recommend that you take a quick look, or, definitely talk to John's team if you're already working with the 5x5 team. This is something that we understand that generally when people are, and I'll just preface this by saying that I think we're working with discerning buyers these days. Like the sales landscape is actually changing from say 10, 15, 20 years ago, where, the salespeople had a lot more education that they needed to do. There's so much information available online now, that often when people actually show up, they're going to be kind of, well-versed in what it is that you do. They might have looked at some of your competitors and now they're wanting some more detail that's specific to the what's in it for me. And so when it comes to the Google ZMOT study, we talk about 7 hours of interaction with you and your brand and your promise, 11 touch points over 4 different platforms. And so what we're seeing is that in order for people to actually make that buying decision, they need multiple touch points. And this is one of the things that a lot of sales teams struggle with, and it actually contributes to the mindset of the salespeople as well. They think that it's kind of like a one and done kind of mentality. And so, a lead comes through from the website, we give them a call, maybe we, have a quick conversation with them. We don't nurture the opportunity. We don't ask enough questions. We don't qualify. And, that person doesn't say, yes, I'm ready to buy now. We hang up the phone and we go, oh, well, that was a dud lead. When in actual fact, if we haven't got the steps of the funnel and the milestones of the funnel matching our sales process and our client journey, then we're really struggling to create that value. So ultimately, one of the things that we work with a lot of our clients at Life Puzzle, especially when we're trying to extract from the founder's head the sales mastery process, we actually look at what are actually the milestones of your client journey. How does your customer engage with you? And maybe we'll take it to the next slide and unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Most of you on the call are probably familiar with what you see on a screen. I mean, it's, sales 101 when you talk about a pipeline or a funnel, but what a lot of people don't spend the time to do is to actually look at what are the different stages of the sales funnel. And so up the very top, we have what we call a suspect, and a suspect is not a prospect. A suspect is just someone like a window shopper or a browser, and they don't necessarily have a need. They might, be a fan of your industry and they follow what you do, but they're never going to be a client. And so often what will happen is we have people at that suspect list. And here's generally what happens for a lot of people that are challenged with their confidence in their sales process is they'll often judge the metrics of their suspect compared to what they close deals, and they start saying, I'm not a very good salesperson because I got 100 inquiries and only 3 people signed up, right? So, we need to be careful not to actually measure our success based on suspects. And so what moves a suspect to a prospect is actually that they actually have a need to be solved. And so they might have raised their hand in response to a lead magnet. Maybe they've made an inquiry of some sort. They've flicked through as a lead from your website. etc. And so, when we look at the difference between the suspect numbers, we can sometimes, if we don't nurture this step of the process of how do we turn suspects into prospects, we can lose half of the inquiry. And so this is where we need to be careful about vanity metrics and, people liking and commenting on things that may not ever necessarily be clients. The next stage, I think, is an extremely important one where we're moving to the qualified phase. And this is where people actually have demonstrated, or you found out that they actually have the resources to solve their need. And so there might be a qualification process. And, in many cases, it might be a strategy session. It could be paid or a free strategy session where some sort of information gathering is done. And we look at starting to match the needs of the client with what we have to offer. And so for a lot of people, a prospect may not necessarily have the resources to invest in the solution. I see lots of salespeople and business owners waste a lot of time on people who were never going to be their ideal client. So this is a really important part of the sales process.
Yep.
Yeah. And this is where we get scale as well. So when we can actually start to really create a step here that identifies the difference between the suspects and the prospects, and more importantly, the prospects to the qualified parties, this is where we start to get that scale and we start to get that traction, and our sales team can actually do more with less because we're working with the people that are, premium leads. The next element here is when they're closed. And so for a lot of people think that this is the last step of the sales funnel. And in a moment, I'll share with you why it's not. So when someone is closed, they're actually committed to the fact that they want to buy your solution that matches their need. You've done a great job of convincing them of that. And now they're closed, contracts are signed, etc. To me, this is not where the sales cycle ends. To me, this most important piece is actually when people become invested. And by becoming invested, what it means is that the client actually realizes the value of their decision and their investment and supports you and your team to get the result that you've promised. So, for example, let's take a look at your process, John. When you work with clients, there's some information that we have to give to you and your team at the beginning as part of onboarding, etc. If we hold that process up, then we're holding up your ability to deliver that result, right?
Totally.
Yeah. And so if we look at the numbers down the right-hand side, we can see that when we have a system, and these are some real numbers. So the first column is some stats with a client of ours that we worked with where they were getting 100 leads every month, suspects. Out of those, there was about 50 prospects. They were losing half of those in the qualification process. 10 of them became closed, but only 3 of them became invested. And so that's that 3% demand we were talking about. When we started implementing some steps in these different things and being consistent with what we actually put out there, not only did they rethink what their lead magnets and what their messaging was, which meant that they were attracting suspects, that meant that there was 90 prospects in that 100. Then we had 80 people qualified and had the means to be able to solve that need. And then 60 went into close and 50 of them invested. So they recognized that they still had work to do in terms of that handover and that delivery. So super phenomenal result. Yeah.
That's cool. And look, I'm the first to admit, we've been guilty of that where just through sheer volume of projects that we're putting through and all that sort of stuff, this is probably where, over the years we may have dropped ball, and by us, making a pivot or a shift to more a performance-driven approach where it's very, very focused on outcomes. Like you cannot shy away from that. You're on the hook to perform, right? And that's where ultimately you want both parties to be heavily invested in that process. So
absolutely.
Awesome stuff. Cool. So sales systems scale map. Say that 10 times fast, Chandell.
Yes, exactly. It is a bit of a tongue twister. And, if you don't have the map and you don't have the directions, then the whole scaling of the sales system becomes very, very challenging, much like the tongue-tied approach. And so we mentioned the 6 milestones of the treasure map of scaling your sales. And this is just a little snapshot that I wanted to share with everybody. This is by no means, the entire system, but I wanted to give people a couple of examples around what we need to tighten up in each of those milestones in order to really affect that funnel and to give you guys some ideas. And so, for example, in the attraction column, things like your messaging, your niche, your avatar, your offers, your call to action, those things are things that you can tweak and turn in order to make sure that you're getting getting better metrics and better measurement. When we're converting, if you've got sales team, what are their KPIs and their targets? What are they measured against? What are the sales steps? Are they mapping against the customer journey? Is it consistent with what we're putting out there online? In the delivery process, how do we make sure that journey experience actually transfers? Results and referrals, how do we surprise and delight? How are we measuring outcomes? What are our terms on collecting cash? Are we looking at repeat business models or recurring profit models? How do we hand over? How do we do communication? And also, how do our promos tie into pricing, and what's the messaging behind that? Resourcing team, how do we profile the right team that fits in with our culture, our values? How do we hire people, train them to create replicable results? And this one is particularly a column for those of you that might be founders or business owners where you're doing the lion's share of the sales. Maybe you've tried your hand at hiring a salesperson before and they just haven't produced the results like you. And so you've shied away from the idea that, oh no, it's me, I have to do it. No one else can do it as good as me. And this is a really important piece. And then of course, there's the leading part in terms of once we have that team on board, how do we continuously improve the team? How do we reinvent the sales process if the market shifts? How do we keep them learning and scale those teams to expand? And, that there's a lot of stuff in there around accountability and growth and making that happen. So like I said, this is not the full list, but I wanted everybody on the call to be able to have a bit of a context around what do we mean by the 6 milestones and how do they then fit into the funnel? Yes.
So talk to us about just generally knowing your numbers.
Yeah. So John, exactly what you just said a second ago, you can't do all of it at once, right? And I'm almost willing to beg the people that are listening and watching to this webinar, please don't try and do it all at once. And so when we look at the funnel, if you measure and know your numbers at each stage of the funnel, then you can actually identify where's the area that's the weakest point. So for example, for the client stats that I shared before, 100 suspects and only getting 3 people invested and enrolled, there's something going on in terms of the messaging, right? So that was a big piece. What are we actually putting out there to get people to raise their hands? And that didn't necessarily match up with what they were selling at the end. So that was an area that they focused on. And the second major area that they focused on was actually the qualification process. So you can see that from 100 suspects to only getting 3, we suddenly went from 100 prospects to getting 60. And so, that's a huge difference. And I think the important thing about knowing your numbers and measuring the steps between each of those things is that it brings a conscious awareness around where the problem actually is, because a lot of people inappropriately judge the problem and they go, oh, we haven't got enough leads. Well, actually, it's not so much about the leads, you're just not qualifying them well, or you're second guessing yourself when it comes to pricing and inviting them to buy, or there could be any number of different things. So what we know is that when we go into a business, so when we go into any business and we work across a number of different industries, predominantly service-based businesses, but when we go into a business and they're not measuring their numbers through this, or them not measuring their results at each of the steps, as soon as we get them to start measuring their numbers, the salespeople's results increase by a minimum of 20% just by putting a measuring mechanism in place. And so I'd like to, if you take nothing else away from our Lunch and Learn today, guys, I'd like to invite you to understand that you need to stop confusing the effort that you're doing in your sales with the actual results. And the only way you're going to do that is by measuring what's the numbers at each of the steps, and then work on the area that has the lowest area of conversion first, and then work on that qualification process. So when we do this, we have happy, efficient teams, because there's nothing worse if you've got salespeople and they're getting leads coming through. They're not making commissions because they're not closing sales, right? Correct. That means we're not qualifying the leads properly. And so we get happier teams because when we get results, selling becomes fun. And I'd much rather for everybody on this call to be converting 60 out of 100 instead of 3. So, that's one of my key takeaways for everybody today.
Can you give us an example of making sales fun?
I mentioned at the beginning of the call that, 80% psychology, 20% strategy, right? And so often what happens is when people aren't having fun, they just go to the strategy only. They don't actually look at the psychology behind the selling. And so if you're a founder, then certainly, getting results is going to make sales feel fun for you because you're seeing the results at the bottom line. I don't think anybody would argue with me on that, John. And so I think that, that whole process it's actually about breaking it down into small, simple tasks that you do consistently that get you that result. And you mentioned about, 7-11-4, and, there were a set number of things that you did. So, just making sure that you know what they are and continuing to do them. And you can't not be successful when you've got those simple things done consistently to get a result.
Awesome.
One other thing I'll say on that on a salesperson, and I'll make it really quick. One other thing that I'll say on that on a salesperson is that if you've got people on your sales team that are doing, repetitive tasks, find ways to make it fun. I remember I've worked in sales my whole life, and one of my first business-to-business sales roles, I made 150 cold calls a day to make appointments for the next day. And so one of the things that I did to keep my mind sharp and my physiology and my psychology in a great space was sometimes if we'd made 60 calls, we would, sit down on the floor or sit under the desk and make the next 5 calls from under the desk.
Oh, wow. Just mix it up.
Just to change the psychology, because we'd be having a bit of a laugh at the fact that, we were, and so change your state, change your psychology, change the body language, make a couple of calls running or walking around. It will change the approach and the outcome.
So cool.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. So every time a sale's made here, we've got a bell, and the salesperson will
ring the bell, celebrate.
Just an awesome, I got that from Simon Bowen, a mutual colleague of ours.
Yes.
It's just good because everyone in the organization, it uplifts everyone. It's like, there's work coming in the door, and, all that sort of stuff gets me excited. We celebrate it. So, I love what you say just about genuinely making it fun. Yes. So a whole bunch of gold nuggets here, Chandell. This is what I, just in preparing for this, putting together the slide deck. These are my key takeaways in terms of business owners will generally reach ceiling in terms of what they can sell. If you want to grow the business, grow your sales team, but you can't do this if you don't have a system for sales. And ultimately, people want to do business with people they trust. So that's in and around building up your 7-11 for supercharging your sales. 30-minute power session. Chandell is an amazingly smart person who has personally given a lot of advice to us, our business. She's worked with my wife, who also has a day spa and made a big impact there. So if you want to find out more, there is a QR code that you can punch in, and I'm going to copy and paste a link into the chat as well. Here we go. We got a question. How do you keep the salesperson's focus on the customer rather than on their results? What's your answer to that, Chandell?
I love that as a question, Mark. I just want to, send some love and congrats to you for, jumping in with the first question. I hope everybody will take that example. So in answer to your question, I think that the two are actually not necessarily separated, right? And we need to build a culture of, if the person's getting those results, then they're actually delivering what they need to the client. And so the best way for us to supercharge those results is to make sure that we've got happy customers that have their questions answered, that are, getting the value proposition, and that they can truly see the return on investment that they're getting. And so, it's a culture around, this win-win-win mentality. And so I always, when I'm training sales teams, I always talk to them about what is the win that they can champion on the customer. And my favorite way of being able to do that is to highlight this concept of interesting versus interested. And so often, if people are too focused on their results and not what the customer needs, it means they're going in there talking about how great they are, how we're going to help them, how amazing the business is, how many years of experience, et cetera, et cetera. It's all very self-focused, as opposed to being curious about what does this person in front of me need in order to really have a transformational experience, not just professionally in the service and the product we're providing them with, but how can we make that so transformational that that result can affect other different areas of their lives as well?
Yeah, like we've got our, full and complete digital solution implemented over the 12 months. Our salespeople are checking in literally at a minimum every month, just doing a temperature check, and that's external to the delivery and the operations of the product. Yeah. And that's where we can catch any niggles or misaligned expectations or challenges and all that sort of stuff.
Exactly.
And they're heavily invested because they want to make sure that and the people that within our team have a very high degree of integrity. So the moment, they feel like, oh, you haven't delivered on this, like, it's like, come on, guys, we need to, make sure we sort this out or fix this little issue or niggle or whatever. And invariably, there's always going to be challenges around that. I track all of our metrics from prospects, but how do you collect numbers on suspects? Great lunch and learn. Thanks, John. Chandell, how would you answer that?
Look, I think that depends on what your measure of a suspect is. And so there are lots of different platforms in addition to your website and your SEO, SEM journey that you're doing. And so, certainly maybe, John, you want to chime in on this from a website perspective, but certainly, a lot of the social media platforms and other places where we're getting those metrics, we can see a lot of the data and the insights. And so, for example, we're very active on LinkedIn, and, we have, we regularly look at the data and the posts and see which posts perform, what's the engagement like, what are people, commenting on, and how do those then translate into, how many prospects did we get from that, how many, and we do lots of different things on different platforms. So measuring that data gives you an idea around who's engaging with the messaging and who's not. So hope that helps, Rachel. John, did you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, like I know Rachel, she is in a marketing role. So you basically, you're doing this stuff in terms of your day-to-day activities in and around looking at, traffic graphs off the back of SEO and your paid ads, traffic and probably your Google My Business listings, how many direction clicks have we had and how many phone call clicks have we had off the back of that. And, I think it's just having a system and a process in place in and around tracking all those top of the funnel stuff that the suspects then get converted through to the prospects. And then if you're obviously, tracking that and it's heading in an upwards direction, then that should have general good flow through the rest of the funnel. Chandell generously is hosting a confident closing challenge. Do you want to talk about this, Chandell?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are from the 17th of October to the 21st of October hosting a 5-day challenge. And so it is a small segment of teaching with, a focus of making sure that you actually nail some of those foundations and habits around each step of the sales funnel, some of the reservations that come up in selling, firing the itty bitty shitty committee. They're the group of people that sit on your shoulder and tell you why you can't do sales at the level you'd like to. And so normally the challenge is an investment of $19.95. There is a link that John will share if you want to go and check out some information about that. But if you would like to be our guest, to say thank you to John's community and for having me here today, anyone that's on the call today that would like to be a guest of ours for that challenge, just reach out to us and we can register you sans investment, and you can come and get a sense of some of the things that we talked about today at a deeper level and get that experience. So if that's something you'd love to do, then certainly reach out to us, support@lifepuzzle.com.au, and we'll make sure we get you all registered so you get all the information. Just a little tip for you, the calls or the live interactions are run 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time each of those mornings. It goes for about half an hour, and there is a recording. So if you register, then you can access the recording if you can't jump on at that time slot. But for those of you that are founders, business owners, it's a great way to start getting your head around some of these things that you need to build out to scale your business and your sales process by returning to some of those kind of foundational, simple but consistent things. So we'd love to see you on there if you want to join us.